Welcome back to the channel. So I've had an email from Jaspreet, who's got a complaint about his driveway having been dug up to repair or replace some broadband cabling, and now looks like this, with marks left all over it and bricks which are dangerously loose and generally in a bad state. Now, without naming and shaming any companies here, I thought I'd do a video on some general guidance about what you might do in this situation. Of course, as always, it can't be relied upon as legal advice, but at least it will give you a nudge in the right direction. So if you have a broadband contract with any one of the providers, clearly they might be using the cabling or the network of someone else, i.e. cabling that is owned by somebody else. Now, it's important to understand that your contract is with your provider, whoever that might be with. Whichever one of the companies providing broadband that you might have the contract with, that is your first point of contact. It is them that is responsible for providing you the service, and if they subsequently use the networking or the cabling that belongs to someone else, that's their business. But your contract is with your provider. If something goes wrong with it, you'll need to look at the terms and conditions as to who's responsible for what in what circumstances, such as if you've damaged the cable, then you might need to pay for the replacement. Or let's say you've had your driveway done and they've damaged the cable, then again you might have to pay for the repair of the cabling. However, if in the event of the service provider deciding that they're going to upgrade the network and they dig up your driveway to do so, your provider is going to be responsible for putting the driveway back in the way that it was supposed to be in the first place. Because any service that they provide you has got to be carried out with reasonable skill and care. And if in doing so, they leave it in a bad way, clearly that's without reasonable skill and care, and you've got a claim against them for the negligent repair or upgrade of the cabling. A quick search of the internet reveals many forums where many people have got exactly this problem, where they've been pushed from pillar to post from their service provider to someone else that owns the cabling, and back and forth, and perhaps even to the subcontractors that did the work, because no one really wants to take responsibility. So what you should do in that situation is tell your service provider that if they are not prepared to accept responsibility, or if the subcontractor is not prepared to accept responsibility, you can, in theory, sue them all and let the court decide who is responsible. But bearing in mind, if you are wrong and your claim fails, you might have multiple sets of costs against you from each defendant. But that said, if you have a strong claim and there is definitely a case to be made that they've negligently repaired or replaced the cabling and left your driveway in a bit of a state, then you would have a claim against any one of the defendants that is ultimately liable. Perhaps they are jointly liable, but perhaps it's just one contractor who in most circumstances will have to indemnify the service provider in the subcontracted work, and therefore if you sue both of them, and even if your claim against your service provider succeeds, they might succeed in a claim for indemnity against the subcontractor. And in some cases, there's a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, seventh, eighth defendant in the case. And I have seen such claim forms where there's a whole list of defendants because no one wants to accept responsibility. But ultimately, if it wasn't you that dug up the driveway and replaced the cables and left it in a state, then it's not your fault. It's either the service provider or the company that they contracted, or the company that they subcontracted the work to, that should be repairing, replacing, or putting your driveway back in the way that it should have been. That includes, in my view, for what it's worth, not legal advice, but just my view for what it's worth, it includes any of the markings that are left on the driveway that shouldn't have been there. It includes any of the mortar or the sand or anything else between the brickwork that should have been replaced properly and hasn't. Any bricks that are loose that shouldn't be loose. Any bricks that have been damaged that should be put back how they were. And any damaged pieces should be replaced by new pieces that match the original driveway. Now, it's impossible and unreasonable to expect it to be 100% the way it was before, but it should be very, very close, and courts will take the view that your driveway should be put back as close to what reasonably could be expected in those circumstances. So as a summary, your first port of call is your service provider, and you should be making the clear case to them that they are responsible for sorting it out. That includes dealing with the subcontractor if they are going to come back and repair or restore the driveway to how it should be. But ultimately, if they absolutely categorically refuse responsibility, then they should at the very least tell you who the subcontractor was, and then you simply sue them both, and you get the court to decide which one of them is liable, which is in many circumstances on balance going to be the subcontractor, because they will have to indemnify under their contract with your provider to put right any damage that's been caused. There is also the argument to make that you benefit from the rights of third parties legislation, which gives you a right as a third party to the contract between the provider and the subcontractor, but that is digging into the law, for which you might need to seek formal legal advice. But broadly speaking, it allows you to rely upon the terms of the contract between your supplier and their contractor to do the work in order to get your driveway repaired. I hope that's of some use. Remember, this cannot be relied upon as formal legal advice. You'd have to seek formal legal advice if you need to rely on it. But broadly speaking, those are the starting points. I would stick with going to your supplier first because your contract is with them. I hope that's useful. If it was, please like the video and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.